Foreign, you're 23.
Yes, we're all gonna 28. Come on, truck when you're ready.
Go ahead.
One truck, white Lincoln X-ray 985, should come back up and heading to the left.
Toyota 2000. Patrick Salvik.
10-4. If you can throw the note in the, something like that, I'm gonna be leaving a note on a vehicle so they can remove it.
Rockingham 505. For Athens, complainant, soon to be ex, slashed her tires and has made threatening comments to her. She's concerned he might return.
And forgive this at 32.
10-4. You're assigned to a vandalism case in Athens. Can you copy the 505?
Yeah, of course. Look at that. No, 3 and Depot Street. Truck boy entry 5.
7435. 10-4.
You go 643 again.
143.
You go with that 43 you had. I didn't hear any, but I had just looks like we do.
10-4. I just wanted to know if you should be put back 76 to Cabot Circle or to the subject's address.
Yeah, I'll be 23 back on the town property case, and I'll be 76 to the William Road address to see if I can find the alert.
10-4. 449 1120. 449 1121. Thank you. 10-4.
Code 4. Alert.
Roadway 535.
You have a great couch.
535.
Should be. You guys know if we're someone plugged into the house. I'll flight up that way.
Caller is now been able to close the front door. He's now pounding on the door, trying to get in still. About 5 foot, long dark hair, tie-dye shirt on, and number 21 is on.
Switch is on, here comes the throttle. Chevy breakers in.
We have separation. Inboard and outboard.
sightseeing. Listen, I got a blowout. A for 3. Inches out. Yeah, hold altitude. Correction. Alpha 4 is off. Track flight emergency. Flight calling. Yeah, hold it. She's breaking up. She's breaking.
Good evening, good afternoon, guys. Good to see you. Looking forward to a little discussion today. I didn't have as much time to prepare the show, but I did learn some really interesting stuff from some very good sources earlier today. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll get to the questions. And then about a half hour into the show, as we do every Tuesday, Bill Noguera will call in from Corcoran Prison in California. He spent 40 years in San Quentin on death row, and his sentence has been commuted to life without parole. Now, he's hoping at some point in the future that it might be life with parole, and then he could possibly get out. But he's been in jail a very long time. He committed murder, and there's no excuse for that. And I'm not someone that's here to judge whether or not he deserves a second chance. To me, it's about he's trying to make the most of his life in prison, has done a tremendous, he's achieved a tremendous amount from prison. He's become an artist. He was not an artist before he killed. He killed at 18. And he discovered that talent in prison and has become a world-renowned artist that's been showed in studios in Paris, London, and New York. In addition, he's written books, screenplays. And most importantly to me, though, he has helped solve cold cases. There's one in particular, and we can't talk about it much right now because it is there's a book coming out on it, and there's also a Netflix series. So the publisher won't let us talk about it until the time is right. But in addition to that, the victims' families are involved. They're grateful. The police are involved, but there are aspects of the case that they don't want discussed publicly yet. So we have to kind of discuss other things. But he spent almost 40 years getting to know serial killers. He is not a serial killer. He doesn't have killing urges. He committed a terrible crime when he was 18, but he's not someone that ever fantasized about killing or does so now. But because of where he was able to become kind of a very unique profiler. And you're going to find that he's extremely intelligent. But you be the judge, if you like, as to whether he has interesting things that can help us have some insight into how these guys think. Occasionally you'll even see a flash of anger. And Bill, I spent a lot of time talking to him. So, I'm not here to judge. I'm here to learn. And I think there's a lot to learn from Bill Noguera. So before we get to the questions, let's go to the important stuff that we learned today. Yesterday in the hearing, one of the interesting things that stood out was that Attorney Alan Jackson informed the court that the state has put more material or requested more material from the feds to be put in the TUI process, where they have to basically vet it to make sure no sources and means and methods, that kind of thing. But it's an official process that they go through before they can transfer this evidence to another agency, in this case, a state agency. I'm not sure if the feds are actually going to do that or if it's just a request at this point. But we were wondering, I'm sure you would too when you listened to it, what is it that the feds held back that the state now wants? And I speculated last night, not on the show, but it was afterwards talking to one of my sources, that what the state wants is the origination materials related to this investigation. Anything that would give the state some idea why the feds launched this investigation. Now, it's not like the feds are going to come in and tell you. So if Karen and her lawyers went in and met with Josh Levy, as it seems that they did all the way back in 2022, really strange. But we're not going to get Josh Levy to come in and explain what they said and why it convinced them. But anything that is documented should be something that they would be able, any documented work is a paper trail, and they if they choose to, would have to give it over to the state. That would include, for instance, now the basis of an investigation is going to be interviews, subpoenas to witnesses, and warrants. Now, the interview notes probably already all came over. They probably already have all of that. But subpoenas, there's really not going to be anything in the subpoena. They don't have to go through a judge for that. That's something that they can just apply for, and you do the paperwork with the clerk. You send a subpoena to the witness. If the witness doesn't think that their testimony is material, they have the right to go through the process of trying to quashing the subpoena. But that's a whole different process. But so there's not going to be a paper trail related to the subpoenas. However, if there are any warrants, there would be, because for a warrant, you have to get a judge to sign off on it, and you have to show probable cause. So you have to show your theory about what the crime is that you need that material for. Now, we don't know, right? But sources say that that it seems to be related to that. So what kind of warrants would there be? What kind of evidence did they go after? Well, we know that they did not request any evidence from the state, which is unusual, right? So they weren't trying to actually look into the investigation into the death of John O'Keefe. They didn't look at any of that evidence, it seems, or unless they just looked at what was publicly available, I guess. It seems like they just read Turtle Boy articles. So what they had was perhaps they had the charging documents, and they had Turtle Boy. And but as far as what they tried to obtain, what they could get was data. So they could go after phones, messaging on phones, GPS data, things like that. So whatever they did go to on that, they had to fill out a warrant. They had to apply for a warrant, and they had to make their case to the judge. And my guess, and it seems to be confirmed by sources, is that originating material was not included in the package that they gave over last week. And now the state wants it. Why does the state want it? Because they want to know what the hell the feds are doing. They wanted to understand what motivated their investigation. Was it properly motivated? Was it properly predicated? And we may not get all the answers to that, but this material may give an insight as to what the state was basing, the feds were basing all of this on, and whether it was proper or whether it was corrupt. There are a lot of indications here, not proof, but indications that this federal investigation of the investigation was corrupt. Another source I talked to with deep experience in law enforcement, high-level experience, said that this investigation was upside down to what it normally is. Normally, an investigation begins with the agents, with the FBI. They're looking into something, and they find evidence of a crime, and then they bring that to the U.S. Attorney's Office. And if it's convincing enough, thus begins the process of warrants and subpoenas and the federal grand jury. But in this case here, it seems to have begun the other way around. It began in the U.S. Attorney's Office at the highest level, or the second highest level. So at the time, Rachel Rollins was the U.S. attorney. There's actually no evidence that she was involved in any of this, but there is a ton of evidence that right under her is the position known as the first attorney. And this is Josh Levy, and he became involved in this early on. He is now the acting U.S. attorney. He has taken Rachel Rollins' job. And there are indications he's been involved all along with this and communicating with the defense team. Now, remember the DA Morrissey's office sent 5 letters to them wanting to know if they had exculpatory evidence related to their investigation and to their upcoming trial for Karen Reed, as is their duty to do that. If the feds had exculpatory evidence, the state is required to try to get all important evidence related to that case. And the feds ignored those letters. They ignored it, so they weren't communicating at all. When I say the feds, I mean the U.S. Attorney's Office. Eventually, there was a letter that was replied to when Morrissey's office sent a letter to the ethics department in the DOJ in Washington. And the letter came back, well, we've talked to the U.S. attorney, and they see things differently. That's it. That's all they said. So while they were telling the prosecution side nothing, they were communicating regularly with the defense team, including telling them about who was subpoenaed and who was when they were testifying before the federal grand jury. And the evidence from Aiden is that Karen told him in, I think this is late November, that there was a conference call between Alan Jackson, David Yannetti, and Josh Levy. And that in this conference call, Josh Levy told them to try to buy more time to delay the trial and to keep this any information about that call from the media. All of this stuff is at the least highly irregular, and certainly very, very suspicious. And that's how the state views it. And they took the extraordinary step a few weeks ago in their official opposition sent to the court. This was in opposition to the motion for dismissal. That motion was put in by the defense, of course, and they put it right there in that opposition that the feds are working with the defense team. That's a really, really powerful accusation. They put it right in there. So at some point, the feds really kind of have to respond to this, it would seem. But this is why it's up to people in the media. And I guess that's me now. I mean, as tiny as I am, but hopefully bigger people pick it up. But there's something really suspicious that's going on here. Now, that was the first step. The second step was to now apparently request that originating material. And because I don't now, that's even risking delaying the trial. Even now, it's been postponed for 5 weeks. But Alan Jackson brought that up in court as a reason to say, this is going to take. We're going to need even more time. So now, whether or not that actually is something that convinces the judge, I don't think that alone would. Like, if all the state is requesting is those originating warrants or documents and things like that, that doesn't seem likely to convince the judge to postpone the trial further. We saw yesterday, naturally, both sides are going to present those documents that they have so far in a different way. The defense team says it's all exculpatory, but I think if you have a sense about how the world works, the defense was going to say that no matter what was in those documents, they could have sent the phone book, and the defense and Alan Jackson was going to get up there with his game show host smile and say it's all exculpatory. But meanwhile, it's not surprising that the prosecution says no, none of it's exculpatory, and 90 to 95% of it is not even new. So you have that dispute there. Now, which side is right? Well, we're not going to see until the trial. Although I think as they present this to the judge, she does have a role in this. So when Alan Jackson is saying all of this is new, well, and the state's saying it's not. So if most of it consists of grand jury testimony by the witnesses that testified in the state's grand jury originally, and they don't in any substantive way change their story, then you have to say, common sense says, no, there's really not new evidence there. But that'll be up to, I don't know if the judge will be allowed to make the call on that. But so we'll see. So Bill's going to be calling soon. So let me get to some of the questions and comments. So somebody has pointed out, and this has been said by a lot of people, that this was a sloppy investigation. And therefore, that's enough to establish reasonable doubt. I don't dispute that in principle, in a general way, that if an investigation is sloppy, if it's sloppy enough, that can be the basis for reasonable doubt. Was this investigation sloppy? And I think the only fair answer is that we don't know. Now, what you're looking at now makes it look sloppy. Sorry, need on my coffee. But what you're looking at now are things that are pointed out by the defense. And you really have to be careful about that. Just for instance, the famous gap in the library video that we now know really doesn't exist. It's a motion triggered camera, and she went home another way. So we will get answers to this in the trial. So I am open to the fact that we may, at the end of the day, after we look at the trial and look at the troopers, will have a chance to defend their actions and explain their actions. And the prosecution will get to explain the process of the state. But you have to realize, we all have to realize, this is a murder investigation is a large enterprise. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of people involved. We're saying this is all Trooper Proctor and Buchanan, right? But no, it's a lot of troopers. They're involved in collecting evidence. Each has their own sphere of expertise. You're testing evidence. There are labs involved, and these labs are overloaded with all kinds of work. So we just really don't know. So there are things now that the defense will highlight, and you'll see this through their PR machine, which seems to be headed by Olivia now, but obviously Turtle Boy, and I think really Sean, at this point, I think at this point you have to say he's just part of a PR team, because either that, or maybe he's gone a little, I don't know. I'm gonna be nice, but this was let me bring something up. She's talking about Brian Albert. All right, so we don't see the full answer there, but it's not that Sean agreed with it, but he entertained it because he had been preceding that by kind of comparing what was going on to Colombian cartels and stuff like that. And we've had this discussion in the summer, and he kept basically trying to give me the impression that the Alberts are this powerful crime family, and there's no evidence of it. There's no evidence of power. There's no evidence of crime. There's no evidence in their economic activity. There's nothing there. There's no evidence in there in Brian Albert's associates. He's a cop. I mean, that's it. He's never been charged with anything similar to that. So this was basically a theory that you had to come up with in order to somehow explain why all of these people were somehow intimidated into lying to a grand jury, and other experts, and troopers and medical experts, all to participate in this conspiracy. And this is where it reached a point where it's hard to know where people have just gone kind of crazy, or where in some cases maybe people are part of a PR team and they're doing their best to present a bogus case, and many people in the public are just going to buy into it, and there's nothing we can do about it. So let me try to get to some questions. If you questioned earlier, I would have missed it, so I'm going to the end, but Tom can highlight any questions too. So I'm trying to catch up who we're talking. Jules says nothing Sean has claimed has come true. And this is really, I mean, he's been saying for so long, and it's like one of those old cults that predicts the end of the world is coming on April 12th or something like that, and it doesn't happen. So then April 12th comes, and they're all waiting for the mother ship to arrive, and then he just says, okay, well, no, it's really going to be on March 3rd, on May 3rd or something like that, and it just, the day keeps coming and nothing ever happens. Nobody gets arrested. There's been no arrests. There's been no indictments. There's been no suspensions. There's nothing. So at the best, what the feds turned over was some discrepancies or little things, the kind of things that Olivia likes to point out. that really just don't move the needle much. They, in theory, could help the defense in trial to create some reasonable doubt. But the idea that the feds are coming in and have found this cover up, no, it's not even possible. And it's not even reasonable to think that. It's not even sane. It's not even sane to think that. I mean, this is what one of the things that bothers me about this case. There was a lot of reasons to have questions about this all summer and maybe during the fall and say, okay, well, maybe there's something weird going on here, right? But at some point, there's enough evidence where you say, that, it seems to be pretty clear that John was killed outside by Karen's SUV, but it's also 100% clear, 100%, that John never went in that house and was not killed by anybody inside that house. And it's just not even, it's not from the world of the sane to claim that it is. It's, and if you were going to claim that all the evidence has been fabricated and all the witnesses have been lying and the troopers are all corrupt and the feds have found this, but then the feds come in with their report and nobody's making that claim. Nobody was arrested. Nobody's suspended. It's no longer sane to believe that. So I'm not sure if the people that make those claims are insane or they're just part of a PR campaign and they're trying to put that out there for people. I don't know which is more disturbing to me, but it bothers me that people in the public can't think about this a little bit better, that we're all so easily duped. It bothers me. All right, let me try to look at the questions. Joey, that's a good comment, and that was surprising to me too. So we'll highlight this. Joey said, the judge stating she received a letter from the deputy U.S. attorney about how to handle the info was surprising. Seems like it's over the Boston office's heads now. Maybe an OIG investigation. Yeah, I don't know. That's going to get murky with what goes on with the OIG and what kind of pressure it needs to be created in order to get, if Josh Levy has indeed done something improper, who's over him? Well, it's the OIG, it's the DOJ. Those are his bosses. Really, his only true boss is the Attorney General and Joe Biden. There's only two people technically over him. But yeah, if the OIG or the ethics department do an investigation and they find things that are improper, he could be in trouble. And I really, when I say trouble, I don't know. I'm not, as far as charges, it would have to be pretty severe. But I think there's enough here where his days in that position are extremely numbered, because how you could conduct that investigation, use those kinds of resources, and find nothing. There's some splaining that has to be done. There's some splaining, no question about it. Bob Brown says, no search of 34 Fairview, no crime scene tape. All right. Oh, I got some interesting information on this, Bob. Thank you. I had heard in the past that there was crime scene tape, but I don't usually report it because I didn't really know. I didn't have a good source. But now I have a good source that lives there right around the corner and who said that she drove by the scene twice just on her way home during the day, not investigating the crime, but just because she lived there. And twice they tried to tape up that crime scene and it was during a blizzard and it just didn't work. The tape just wouldn't stay up. So no crime scene tape? No, that's not true. They did tape it. Red Solo cups, that's good investigative work as far as I'm concerned, because these guys understood that it was, as soon as it became a suspicious death, it automatically goes to the state police, and they know it takes time for those guys to get called in. In the meantime, the snow was destroying that blood evidence. You had to do something with it quickly. It was going to be lost. And they obviously believed that maybe that could have been someone else's blood. If it turned out to be John's blood, but they couldn't have known that. So those guys they're just root cops. They're not trained to do a murder investigation, and they don't have evidence kits and things like that. So they used their ingenuity and got those from a neighbor, and I think those are good cops that should be commended. As far as no search of 34 Fairview, well, there was no warrant for it. Officer Lank was in the house by 6:25. and was in there for some time. But no, there was no official search. Did they ask Brian if they could? We'll have to see what that testimony is. My guess will be no. We do have to remember, yeah, this just human nature being what it is. Brian's a cop from Boston. This was in Canton, and Brian's brother is a detective on the Canton police force. So yeah, there's always going to be a reluctance on the part of cops to invade the space of another cop. But you know, nobody ever had any reason to believe anything took place inside the house. Taillight pieces only found days later. Well, all right, the taillight pieces were found, the main piece and the original pieces were found at 5:45 in the afternoon by the CERT team, by the state police. Now, over the course of days, pieces continued to turn up. And the reason is because, in case you guys aren't familiar with New England, snow melts. And the snow was melting. There was a lot of snow that fell that day. It was a pretty big storm. And snow was melting, exposing little tiny pieces of taillight. Not really surprising. And that stuff got plowed, those taillight pieces. So it got moved around. So it's going to be very difficult to find until the snow melted. So we'll check in more questions, but I do expect a call any moment from Bill. And all right. Maybe the fact that Levy's office, so Mako Ron says, maybe the fact that Levy's office is allowing the substance of their investigation to be entered into the court is to give off the appearance of transparency for when the OIG comes. Yeah, I mean, who knows, right? We don't really know what they're thinking. And, you know, there's human beings are capable of all kinds of things, including if you've lived a clean life and you think of yourself as on the side of justice, and then you get duped, then at some point, now, yes, you might try to cover your ass, but there's a point where you come clean. So I don't know Josh Levy personally, and I think it's entirely possible that he got duped here. And so maybe there's a time where he tries to do the right thing. I don't know. It was my friend that's a judge who doesn't follow this case, but was utterly shocked that the federal grand jury notes, not notes, but testimony would be given to anybody. Given to the state, given to the defense, and it's even more shocking that this is going to be allowed to be used in court. It seems unheard of, but this is an extremely unusual case. That's why it's a great case, and that's I mean, it's terrible for the families, but it is a great case. And if you just in terms of our learning about how the process works. Julio Suave, all right. I like Julio, so I'm going to put this up here. Oh, I hit the wrong one. Chat moved. All right. He says, Kevin hasn't talked to me since I told him I think he's about 12% right on this case. Well, I was actually wondering why you hadn't been in chat the last couple of shows. I was worried about you, Julio. Honestly, I was like, what happened to Julio? So as far as me having talking to you, I haven't seen you reach out to me in any way. So I don't know. But I did miss you in chat. So I don't agree with you on the 12%. My batting average is much better than that. And I think anybody who's followed it should be clear now, especially since what I've been reporting about the feds and many other things. So, and I always correct the things that get wrong. I had information last week about the indictments coming, but I don't like to report things in any way that are sensitive. And so, but what I said on the show is that Turtle Boy, he will not get out of jail. But that was based on the reports that there'd be more indictments. And so but I couldn't predict what a judge would do. And so that prediction was wrong, but it was based on information that was accurate. Unfortunately, there are things you can't say in public. Jay James, Caitlin in the house or no? I don't even know who Caitlin is. Caitlin that's usually in chat with us? She's just a good sleuth. I don't think she was in the house, but I'm not sure. This I don't know. Is Caitlin part of I've never heard the name Caitlin connected to the family, but or I can't think of it at the moment. So I know that he's calling right now.
Accomplices Global. A prepaid call from
William Noguera.
an incarcerated individual at the California State Prison, Corcoran, California. This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded. You have a prepaid call. You will not be charged for this call. To accept this call, say or dial 5 now. Thank you for using Global Tel Link.
Hey, Kevin.
Hey, Bill. Good to see you. I had set up with the speaker and tried it, and I'm going to give it a second to see. If I can't get this hooked up to the speaker, I'm going to do this just the way we did last week, which still should be fine. So give me a moment and see. I'm going to go into settings. I don't know why it's not. And I practiced with this before, and it worked. So let's just go into sound settings. All right, I don't see it. So I'm going to just give me a second to set up the speaker, set up the phone. We'll just hook it right up to the speaker the way we did it last time, and I'll turn the gain up. All right. So hi guys, this is Bill Noguera, who is in prison. I'm going to get a little further away from the mic. Give me some. All right. So Bill, just give us an idea how things are going there so we can hear your voice.
Pretty good. I'm actually inside of the Corcoran 4B yard buildings, which is 4BI, or one left is where I'm at. And yeah, it's been a pretty good day. I've held a couple of classes for the administration here today, and at this time, and usually on Tuesdays, I find myself in the cell so I can call and make this appearance on this particular show.
Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it. Guys, just so you know, because I've got the gain turned up, I'm sitting a little bit further away from the microphone, and I've got Bill up close to it. So just keep giving me feedback. All right, sounds good to you? Okay, excellent. All right, Bill, we're going to talk about William Bonin today, right? And
yes,
yeah. So we're interested in, obviously you spent a lot of time with him and got to know him, and you have a lot of stories about this. But just also keep in mind that a real focus for us is this is one of the rare times where one of these type of predators went out and found and mentored and developed accomplices and used accomplices. So we'll go back to that. But give us some background on William Bonin, the freeway killer.
Okay, yes, so he is known as William Bonin. His middle name is George. He is also known as the freeway killer and the freeway strangler. During his time as the freeway killer, he, as you mentioned, is one of the rare serial killers to have an accomplice. But not so much just one accomplice. He actually had 4. And think about how difficult that is, that a predator of his caliber, and I don't mean this by any way, shape, or form that he is to be looked upon as someone of high quality. I mean this by him being a sexual predator and him being as rare to find this type of predator that has shared his victims with 4 different individuals, and he interchanged them different times during his spree, which lasted about a year's time.
That's just that's really interesting. So one of the questions that I always ask is, in your experience, in your dealings with William, did he go by William? Did he go by Bill? What are some of the personal details about him? What was he like when you first met him?
Well, William, but he was known as just Bonin. When I met him, he was known as Bonin, and he was on death row when I got there. He also came out of the same county that I came out of, was Orange County. And he is, by all accounts, if you meet him and you didn't know who he was, he doesn't give you the impression of someone that is aggressive, that's a predator in any way. You have to get to know him and you start seeing the signs. he is generally a little bit awkward. And there's something you can't put your finger on, seems to be always present with him. And when I first met him on death row, he came off this way. He also hung around with a number of serial killers on the row. There was a card table on the yard that he was on, and in that yard, he was always playing cards with other serial killers, which was Randy Kraft. Another serial killer was David Carpenter. He also played cards with Lawrence Bittaker, who was also known as the Toolbox Killer. So you have a plethora of serial killers on this particular yard on death row where William Bonin was always at. And he later developed a very interesting relationship with Lawrence Bittaker, the Toolbox Killer.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things we always look for too, Bill, is there are certain things, like you've always said, that none of these two guys are exactly alike, and that's understood. But another thing is there are a lot of commonalities. So for instance, you've explained in the past that they tend to be that they're generally almost overwhelmingly born with this kind of in nature, and that they don't feel any remorse. But there always are exceptions to the rule. Is there anything? What are the parts about William Bonin that were different or unique to him? Are there anything like that stood out like that?
Well, in many terms, and many times, serial killers deny what they've done. They may confess that to the authorities when they're arrested, but later on they change their tune. They begin to hide behind, fantasies of being innocent, that it wasn't them. That wasn't the case with William Bonin. He embraced exactly what he was, and he did not hide that fact at all on death row. And I've mentioned this before, that while you're on death row, you're able to be who you want to be without fear of being judged, because you've already...
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
And he was on a protective custody yard, so no one was going to do anything to him. As I mentioned, he played cards with serial killers. And William Bonin embraced that role during the time that I spent speaking to him, because, as I've mentioned, I was mind-stalking these guys. They had no idea that I was researching them, that I was studying them, studying their traits. And every conversation I had with them, I was trying to push a particular agenda to them so they would open up to me. William Bonin was one of my first subjects, and he was one of the most forthcoming of all of them. And there is a reason for this. You and I off air have spoken about this, but he actually admitted, without any prompting from me, that he had seen me when I was a young boy, and he actually stalked me. Once he found out I was that boy that he once stalked, it was very easy for me to get close to him and get him to talk to me. So the relationship I had with William Bonin was very unique in that I was able to get closer than probably anyone except for his crime partners, who were, as I mentioned, 4 different young teenagers.
So when he saw you, because was he thinking of you in his own mind's eye as he remembered you as a boy? Because he killed little boys, right?
Well, he killed individuals anywhere between the age of around 12 to around 19. That was his range. Mm-hmm. And when he saw me, he did not know who I was. When he met me and I was on death row, I did not look anything like the young boy with long hair that he saw sitting at a bus stop. I was much more developed. I had short hair. I wore a mustache and a goatee or a Van Dyke. So I didn't look like that guy. Mm-hmm. During our conversations, as I was leading him to believe that I also was like-minded, which is something I had to do to get close to these guys. You have to make them feel comfortable. And from the very beginning, my whole purpose in getting close to them is to dispel some of the beliefs that other psychologists and law enforcement had about these guys, because I knew for a fact they were untrue. However, I couldn't prove it at the time. It took several decades of study and research to come to these conclusions. But when I got very close to him, he made the observation that he always drove around Huntington Beach, Whittier, on Beach Boulevard, and he cruised these spots looking for young teenagers. And when he said that,
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
when he said that, and the type of MO that he had, because remember, this is very early on. This is 1987, 1988. So not a lot is known about serial killers' habits. So I asked him about his cruising, his stalking. And he said, well, yeah, this is how I did it. And then on one occasion, he said that there was this one kid, and he chuckled. And I asked him, what's going on? Why'd you chuckle? He said, well, because I saw this boy. He was Hispanic, tall. He was very thin. He said he was very good looking. And I saw them, and I stopped my van, and I got very close to look at him, and I stopped. So I wanted, of course, ask, why did you stop? He said, well, I took a good look at him, and his words, he was beautiful, but he looked more like a predator than prey. So I asked him, what are you talking about? What do you mean a boy who's a predator? He goes, this guy, or this kid, he said, he was extremely, he had a very masculine presence, is what he said. But he looked, because of the long hair, at first I thought it was a young girl. But then I looked closely, and I realized it was a young boy. And I said, so why didn't you approach him? Because, again, I'm trying to get close to him. He said, he kind of scared me. He didn't look like a victim. And I said, well, what was different about it? He says, well, he had a surfboard next to him. When he said that, immediately I stopped. So the next day I came outside, and I had a picture. And that picture was of me at age 14 through 13, 1978, 1979, when he would cruise that particular area. And I called him to the fence, and I said, look at this picture. And as soon as he got it in his hand, everything changed. He touched the picture, he looked at it, and then his eyes met mine, and he smiled. And he said, you're him. You're my unicorn. Imagine that.
So, and you guys, what part of California was this? That did you guys both live in the same town, or?
Well, I hung around the Orange County, Beach Boulevard, Huntington Beach, because my father would drop me off before he went to work very early in the morning, sometimes 4 in the morning, sometimes 4:30, and I would catch the bus with my surfboard all the way to Huntington Beach. Mm-hmm. That's when he began to stalk me.
I want to go back a little bit to your beginnings when you decided to kind of profile these guys. Obviously it wasn't overnight, but you've been doing it for a while, so it was early on. What was the process? So, like, for instance, had you seen, the idea of a profiler, I don't know if that really kind of came into public vogue until, like, say, the 90s, right? Maybe a little bit earlier with the Silence of the Lambs and stuff like that. Was there something looking at that?
Seconds remaining.
Why don't we come back to that? Why don't you call back, Bill? We'll come right back to that question.
Okay, I'll call right back.
Okay. Okay, guys, thank you we'll come back in a moment. Bill's calls are limited to 15 minutes, so he has to call right back. And Robert, these things don't always have the ring of truth, because sometimes someone's trying to sell a story, And so that's all something that we have to look into. Most of the things that he has told me about serial killers actually are consistent with my understanding of what these guys would be like.
This is Global Tel Link. You have a prepaid call from
William Noguera.
an incarcerated individual at the California State Prison, Corcoran, California. This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded. You have a prepaid call. You will not be charged for this call. To accept this call, say or dial. Thank you for using Global Tel Link.
Welcome back, Bill.
Hey, Kevin. Thank you.
And anybody, just while you're here, guys, if anybody has any questions that you want to send to Bill, please just put them right in chat, and I will ask him as soon as he's done making whatever point that he's on. So thank you very much. Now, Bill, just back to, I want to get a better understanding of this process. It probably wasn't overnight, but what triggered you to think that maybe you could profile these guys, maybe do some introspection on that and see how that process went for you.
Yeah, well, see, it's like a person who normally, hunts rabbits, and then later on he begins to hunt deer. And I know it sounds kind of way out, but for me, I started profiling, not really the word profile, I started studying human behavior. And it was really because of self-protection. I first started studying my father's habits, when he would be in a bad mood, when he would get physical. He was my first test subject just in the human behavioral sciences. I was very young. And as time grew on, I was living in a neighborhood, La Puente, California, where there's a lot of gangs. And then I started studying how to avoid gangs. Again, for protection. I was not in a gang, but I was often picked on, and I often had to fight against 3-4 kids. Of course, I didn't want that confrontation, so I studied how these gangs worked, where they hung around, just habits of who they were and what they did, what made them attracted to particular victims. And the whole time that this is developing, I had no idea what I was doing. I was a very young boy, and this was only for protection. I began the study of the martial arts to become a fighter. And as time went on, I would study fighters. So it's really basically a plethora of information I was processing. How to read people, how to read gangs, how to understand people's motives, their traits, really their MOs. It was a very budding field that no one really knew a whole lot about. Of course, we know about John Douglas and Mindhunter, and even he, early on, was just studying serial killers from afar because he didn't understand what he was looking at. No one did. Of course, psychologists got involved, and of course, that is where this whole profiler thing came up, because they were profiling a particular person, his MO, his signature, because they were seeing these things for the first time. With me, at age 16, I became hot kilo middleweight champion. And again, I'm studying fighters. I was one of the first guys when the pioneer human cockfighting started, which led to today's MMA. Again, studying individuals' fight habits, their motives, their instincts, their skill level. All of these things led to me analyzing people. When I was arrested for killing a person, and I went to jail, it became very natural for me to study people's habits, learn a yard. It's called reading a yard, and we all have it. So this isn't just unique to me. What's unique to me is the time I've spent studying people and why it became an easy jump for me to go from normal people to serial killers. So in prison, they call it reading a yard. And maybe 600-700 years ago or 1,000 years ago, when we were walking around the jungles and the forest, we knew when a predator was hunting us. Those instincts are gone now from normal human beings. You see it sometimes from veterans who've been in the army or at war. But for the most part, you don't see it. In prison, it's alive and well. Men in prison have developed the skill to smell tension or feel tension. You can actually smell the adrenaline of a person who's scared or about to do something very violent. The body releases hormones that we can pick up. I have trained myself to notice this, to feel it, to smell it. All of these things I put together in a package. So when I'm dealing with serial killers and looking and talking to them, I actually learn more from what they say and sometimes what they don't say. So this is a long process. I'm now 60 years old. It's taken probably 54 years to develop this to the level that I have. There isn't a yard in the world a prison yard I can't walk on, and within seconds I can tell you what's about to happen and what's not about to happen because of people. In prison, I have learned habits. I memorize everybody's habits. So if they stray from that habit that they do every day, I know something is different. So you start looking at different cues.
I want to get Bill to the question of accomplices because that's a big part of this case here. So we've been, I have a friend that I work with on a documentary. His name is Dave McGrath, and he's studying a bunch of cases that were primarily in the 70s and in the early 80s. And one of the theories is these involve missing children, boys mostly, in New England. And one of the theories is that these guys were using accomplices, which makes it easier to get away with their crime. They're much less likely to make a mistake because of their difficulty controlling some of their impulses. So this was one of those rare examples in Bonin where he actually used accomplices. So tell us how he developed accomplices. What did he look for? How did he meet them? Tell us everything you can about the accomplice use that he used.
Okay. Yeah, so accomplices are a very funny thing because they're not always the same. In his case, he was in prison for a while. He actually went to prison for sexually assaulting a number of boys, young men in their teens, 12, 13, 14 years of age. And when he went to prison, he had time, and I'm talking about William Bonin, he had a chance to develop the fantasy. We've talked about this before, and I've mentioned that a number of these killers develop a sense of fantasy while they're in jail or in long truck drives because they're able to really think. It's called self-reflection in some cases for rehabilitation. Mm-hmm. These guys are self-reflected to discover exactly who they are. William Bonin was a very aggressive homosexual, and he's a pedophile. And the case of his accomplices, those accomplices really came to know him and he to know them because of just, when you're in that world, you're able to meet a lot of people. And it's extremely rare for anyone to confide in another person that they're going to kill somebody.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
In words, can they confide in that person that they're about to kill somebody for sport? Mm-hmm. In his case, in Bonin's case, he meets a guy by the name of Vermin Butts. And according to William Bonin, he said that he admired him because he said he had it all together. He felt that everybody liked him, and since William Bonin, was awkward, this guy kind of really would help him meet people. That's what he said. Mm-hmm. I don't believe it. Mm-hmm. Okay? Yeah. So that's what he told psychologists and psychiatrists. I want to tell you right now, that is a complete lie. William Bonin was lying, as he lied a number of times during interviews with law enforcement. The guy that he met, Vermin Butts, was a very geeky guy. He had no idea that this guy was cool or anything else. The Vermin Butts was a guy who had attempted suicide 3 times prior to meeting William Bonin. He was a the kind of guy that dressed up in Darth Vader uniforms. He studied witchcraft. He was a guy who self-proclaimed himself a bisexual. The relationship with Bud emerged out of a sexual relationship with William Bonin. That relationship was purely sexual. And when they began to talk about their fantasies during the sexual relationship is where William Bonin began to speak to him about some of his habits. Vernon Butt had aggressive fantasies, which he allowed William Bonin to perform on him. That's how they began to speak about possibly killing somebody. Not because, as people have suggested in the past, that he was manipulated into it, and later on when he was arrested, he said that he was afraid of Bonin. That is absolutely untrue. I spoke to William Bonin directly about Vernon Butts. And according to him, and I can tell when someone's lying, so you ask, how can you? You know, he lied to police, he lied to psychologists. How could you tell that he wasn't lying to you? I didn't interview him for 2 days or 2 weeks or 2 months. I was able to speak to William Bonin over years. The same questions I asked him in the first 8 months that I knew him, I asked him 7 years after. And the answers were always consistent. It's very difficult for a person to have so many conversations as he's had with me to keep all his stories straight unless they were absolutely true. Vernon Butts, just like William Bonin, just like Norris, is the sidekick to Lawrence Bittaker, the toolbox killer, was 100% involved in these murders and was a fully integrated accomplice. He wasn't pushed. He wasn't threatened. He did this because he wanted to. That is one of the rarest things you can find in serial killers is when they can find someone like-minded. He did that. And that's the reason that I was able to get close to him, because I made him believe that I was like-minded and I was able to get him to talk to me.
So how old was Vernon when William, I'm not sure if I said, is it Vernon or Vernon, but when William met him, and was Vernon himself fantasizing about killing people up to that point, or did that fantasy kind of get fostered and cultured by William?
He was 21 years old when Vernon, I mean, it's very difficult to say that name, but and as I mentioned, he had an obsession with witchcraft, death, Darth Vader, Dungeons and Dragons, and he often actually would go with his girlfriend, who again was bisexual, to these rituals and events, and he visited graveyards. So he already had the type of mindset that was easily coaxed by William Bonin. And from what William Bonin said, they spoke about killing, but immediately agreed, and he became his number one accomplice. The other boys that he used, which they were teenagers, were very young, also fully engaged, because you can't sit there and watch someone murder, torture, sodomize, and really mutilate a child.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
And not be 100% okay with it, and then go back and do it again.
Would Vernon have become a killer on his own?
Just as bad.
I'm sorry, Bill, but would Vernon have become a killer on his own? Is where I'm trying to go with the question.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't believe so.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Because Bud lived in a world of fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons. He liked the witchcraft rituals. He liked to go to graveyards. that's kind of an obsession with death and the fantasy world that he lived in.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't become real to him until William Bonin came in the picture.
Mm-hmm. Once
he came in the picture, he fully blossomed as a serial killer. Let me call you back.
Okay, thank you. Okay, guys, thanks for being here. We'll have another call with him. Also, there is a new channel that I've set up called Mind Hunting from Death Row. Since Bill spent 40 years there, so I have there's 3 videos up there. We'll put a new one up this week, so please check it out. Mind Hunting from Death Row, and this is an interview with Bill about Rodney Alcala, and it was a very productive interview. I was actually surprised at how productive it was when I went back and was editing it to put it up. This is Rodney Alcala is known as the dating game killer. He actually went on the dating game, a prominent TV show at the time, and he went on while he was wanted and in the middle of his killing spree.
The California State Prison, Corcoran, California.
And Alcala was a guy who was a normal high school kid in the sense he dated girls, didn't do anything violent, was very intelligent, on the track team, on the yearbook committee, and he became one of the worst killers.
Thank you for using Global Killing.
One of the worst killers known.
Hey, Kevin.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for being back. Yeah, so just while I'm focusing on Vermin too, because we're trying to really drill down on this Accomplice thing, and we may come back to this again next week. But so your idea is that he would not have. Now, was Vermin? What was his intelligence level? I don't know if you met him, so maybe you heard. But was he someone that was easy to manipulate?
I did not know Vermin Butts. I did not know him.
Yeah.
As I said, I met and knew William Bonin very well during my course of research. But Vermin Butts was an organized guy. He wasn't dumb by any stretch of the imagination. He had an above average IQ from everything I've researched and know. He was very organized in the fantasy world. He had mystery parties. He had role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, which he administered. He was the administrator of these games because he had a bit of a club that he would run. And he also did various searches around the city of Downey for murder objects, like artifacts and things that he would hide. So these particular interests attracted Bonin. And there was a lot of conversation that they had between each other about death, about killing, and that's when Bonin suggested the rape and murder of a teenage boy, and Butts found it very attractive and immediately jumped into it with him.
Okay, so let's look in. So what about some of the other accomplices that he developed? Give us some insights into this process and how likely. So we're trying to find out how likely it is for other accomplices to be working together in any of these cases. How exceptional it is, or how there may be other examples of it. So how did that work?
Okay, so usually you have to understand that in a relationship with a serial killer or serial killers, plural, there's usually a dominant and what's considered a submissive perpetrator. Now, that doesn't mean that he's a submissive like like the other guy dominates him. That's not what I'm talking about. The submissive and the dominant only is because one is more of a force. He makes the little detailed decisions like, let's take my van, let's cruise here. He just takes the initiative and the other guy follows. It's like playing Batman and Robin. One of them's Batman, someone's got to be Robin, even if it's only slightly more dominant. Now, his second accomplice was a guy by the name of Gregory Mealy. He was only 18 years of age.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
These are teenage boys. And Mealy was, well, not the smartest guy in the world. He had a lower IQ. He had dropped out of school. He didn't know how to write. And he actively participated in 2 of the murders that he accompanied Bonin on. This guy really is a lot more submissive. He entered the relationship with Bonin out of, a sex drive. He was gay. And Bonin later confessed that he was also felt sorry for him and wanted to bring him under his wing. Again, I don't believe it. My position on Mealy is that Bonin is the dominant, but he followed along because it excited him. It's something that he found attractive. He didn't go just once and saw what happened and immediately went to the police department, or was he too scared to continue? He came back. He came back and performed a second murder. And these aren't murders where you pull a gun and you shoot somebody. These are very thought out, long events of torture, mayhem. Remember, they are raping a child. They are beating him over the head. They are torturing him with pliers. They are biting pieces of the body off of the victim. And then they're putting ice picks into ears. They're manually strangling these boys. This isn't something that someone can say, well, we just walked by before I knew it. He shot the person. I really wasn't involved. That's not the case here. So William Bonin had a very sensitive, I guess, feeling for who he could approach with this type of behavior, and felt that he could get away with it, and obviously he was correct.
Talk about the targeting, Bill. Did they target these kids ahead of time, or did they just pick out someone that was vulnerable? How much time went into targeting?
Well, in most cases, we talk about organized and disorganized serial killers. Organized killers stalk their victims. They fantasize. They may fantasize for 2-3 weeks, a month, maybe even longer before they take the person. They study the victim. In the case of Bonin and all his accomplices, for the most part, he is a disorganized serial killer, meaning that he finds people usually by chance. His method of operation was to cruise around in this van that he had. And he would drive around different locations like pizza parlors, bus stops, restaurants, skating parks. And he would basically just come by, talk to the kid, ask the child if he wanted to ride to Disneyland, and sometimes he would say, hey, I'll give you $200 for sex. Some of the kids were gay. Some of them were bisexual. And he knew how to pick these kids. Remember, he is a predator. So a predator that knows his prey. William Bonin was gay, although he was married. He was gay. He knew his victims, and he could tell what they looked like. In some of the cases, some of these boys were not gay. Some of them were. But it was just a matter of cruising around and stopping and asking if they wanted to ride. Once he got them in the van, usually his accomplice was driving, William would subdue them and then begin the torture and rape. Sometimes the kids would come along voluntarily because he offered them money for exchange for sexual favors.
Right.
And once the sexual conduct started happening, he escalated very quickly.
Right.
Or when he asked the child, are you gay? If the kid said, no, I want out, he became very aggressive then too.
Right. So with these, we're going to try to avoid any of the more gruesome details or anything. So what we're mostly focused on is the targeting, the mindset. So did they cultivate a relationship beforehand with these kids and kind of groom them so that they weren't a stranger, win over their trust, or were their kids being seized, kind of off the street?
Yeah, they were being seized off the streets. He'd find them, as I mentioned. There was no organization to it. Just pick them up off the streets. Sometimes they were budding sex workers, and when he offered them money, they would get in the car, or I'm sorry, the van, and from there it got really bad very quickly. And as I mentioned, the form of torture was pretty bad. He was a very brutal person, meaning William Bonin and his accomplices. They tortured these boys sometimes up to 8 hours.
Yeah, we don't. Like I said, Bill, we're going to try to avoid that part of the conversation. Just it's uncomfortable for people to hear. So, with the accomplices, were any of them? Did any of them? See these? A lot of the accomplices may not have had those kind of killing fantasies until they were developed by William, or kind of brought out of them by William. Did the extreme nature of going through that? Did they balk at that at all, or have any regrets, or at any point try to resist or have second thoughts? With the
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Well, in the case of his third accomplice, because I said he had 4 different accomplices. Yes, the last 2 guys that were much younger. For example, William Paul, and I don't know how to pronounce his last name. It's P-U-G-H, Paul. He was only 17 years old, and he had a bit of he backed away a little bit from it. He said that he met William Bonin at a friend's house, a guy named Fraser's house, and if people are wondering who this guy Fraser is, he's a friend of Bonin's. He's actually the guy who picked up Bonin before he started his killing spree that we know of. And William Bonin made the comment to him, "This is never going to happen again. No one's ever going to testify against me," meaning that the next victims would be killed. So he met this kid, William Pogue, at this guy's residence, and he accepted a ride from Bonin. And according to Poe, William Bonin again immediately offered him a sexual relationship, which he said absolutely no. I got very scared, and he was let go. He said that he wanted to go to a different residence that wasn't his. He didn't want William Bonin to know where he lived, and he was dropped off there, and that was it. However, again, this is where I don't believe that, because Poe immediately after this engaged in killing a teenage boy with William Bonin. So again, this is a very difficult thing. I don't think anybody can tell you exactly what happened, but William Bonin told me that every one of the guys, meaning William Poe, Miley, Vernon Butts, and the last guy that he used as an accomplice, all knew exactly what he was going to do because he told them beforehand. He was involved with each one of his accomplices sexually. And from that sexual engagement is where he was able to figure out that these guys would be receptive to helping him during and, well, becoming serial killers with him.
Okay. Bill, I think we're probably going to be running up against the clock. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop this part of this interview for now because I had a long day today, so I need to get some supper in me. And so I'm going to take some questions from the audience on the Karen Reed case, the other case that we've been looking into. But this is the chance for you to just say anything you want to tell them about visiting any of your websites or any of your work.
Sure. Well, again, thank you all for listening in. This is a very important subject, which is to really look into the minds of serial killers and what they actually do, rather than what people guess what they do. In a lot of these cases, these experts have read a lot of books about them. And again, I don't know if I would suggest that you guys let someone operate on you who's read a bunch of books about it, rather than someone who actually has been there. So what I bring to the table is unique information that I got from the killer himself, If I don't know, as a few moments ago, I'll tell you I don't know the answer to that question. I'm here to give information that is going to help you not be a victim or possibly learn something you didn't know before. Again, you guys can please sign up for my newsletter at williamnoguera.com. You can click on there. It's free. You get exclusive information on what's going on there. I have a TikTok account that will be starting up next month in March, as well as a new book coming out called Through the Lens of a Monster, which the television series is in production about.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Okay, well, it's
next week about this case.
Yep.
If you have any questions, please submit them to Kevin, and I'll be happy to answer those questions.
Thank you very much for your time, Bill, and I look forward to talking to you again soon and saying goodnight for everybody else too. So thank you. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much, and everybody, good night. Be safe. Be aware of your surroundings. Your life could depend on it.
Okay, let me just adjust the volume. Okay. If anything, all right. So if anybody wants to give me some feedback as we go as to any of the volume here to make sure everything sounds okay. Guys, thanks for being here. I know these are difficult. This is a difficult. Some of this is really hard to hear. So I've had a lot of conversations with Bill, and I do think there are tremendous insights. I think these guys are still a mystery, and there's a lot of problems in police investigations of these guys. I saw this even just last year in Brian Kohlberger, and actually I have an interview with Bill on Brian Kohlberger that I have to edit and put up on the channel. That's Mind Hunting from Death Row. If you want to go there and check it out, please. So when I looked at the before they caught Brian Kohlberger and looking at the circumstances of the murders, this is the case in Moscow, Idaho, and there were 6 people in the house, and at the time we didn't realize that there was only one person on the first floor. We thought that I think most people thought that there were 2 on the first floor, 2 on the second, and 2 on the third. And so the 2 girls were killed on the third, and then the young couple was killed on the second. But actually, one of the other people that lived in the house also lived on the second floor. And as she heard some stuff that was going on, and when she opened her door, actually encountered Brian as he was leaving. For whether he didn't see her or was spent, he didn't harm her. And then she, in some kind of state of shock, pretty much locked herself in a room and didn't call the police until many hours later, till like 11 o'clock in the morning. Just a nightmarish experience that she went through. But when I looked at that, one of the things that I saw that I determined was that, see, people were speculating that this was a targeted killing in the sense that it had a motive. Okay. And people were speculating, was there a drug deal gone bad? But to go in and kill 2 people on the third floor and then 2 people on the second floor, but then to let the other to not go down to the first floor, to me was a sign that this was let's call it a serial killer, even though apparently we assumed then, and this seems to be the case now, that it was the killer's first crimes. But they got to start somewhere, right? But this was killings that were done because the killer fantasized about killing. They weren't revenge killings. They weren't something like that. And so this is what I concluded on my channel here before they caught Brian Kohlberger. And this has turned out to be accurate. Brian Kohlberger didn't kill those people because he had some kind of motive, that one of them wronged him in some way. Yes, it's possible that one of the girls maybe didn't give him the attention that he thought he deserved at a coffee shop or something like that. The girls worked as waitresses, but I never thought that was the case. You're going to kill someone on the third floor and then come down and kill someone on the second floor. That's a killing spree. You're doing it because you have fantasized about killing for a long time. That was my conclusion then, and I think that holds up. So I think the police were wrong about that, or at least the police spokesman that made a lot of incorrect statements from Moscow. And I think that's because people still don't understand how these guys think. They're fantasizing about killing. And this is obviously what Kohlberger was doing for a period of years. And a lot of times they don't, it's not uncommon that their first kills are at the age of 26, 27 years old. That seems, obviously there's a lot of variety in this. You know, Jeffrey Dahmer killed at 18, but that's not uncommon at all, because I think this is a fantasy that develops in their mind for a long time, and then it proceeds to stalking. So a lot of times these guys are peeping toms, and so they're looking in windows and that kind of thing. BTK spent years doing that before they finally graduate to killing. But it's that period of incubation in their minds of that fear, that fantasy developing, that's important. Oh, Caitlin had a question. I'd love to know what he thinks about the Long Island serial killer. That's good. So I will ask him that privately on the phone when I next talk to him and see if he'd like to talk about that. I can't email him, and he doesn't have the internet. So he can research anything, but his wife, he has a wife now, and his wife has to send him that information. So that's a process. But so it's possible he's already been researching this though. So I'd like to see what he says about that too. That's a really good question, Caitlin. Thank you. So we can go back to the Karen Reed case for a little bit, and then I have to have supper. Been a long day for me. I had my first radiation treatment, and it was a blast. It was not painful or anything like that. It's for anybody. Pretty much everybody is going to deal with cancer at some level, at some point, whether themselves or a family member. And, there's a lot of scary stuff about it, but some of the stuff is not so scary, and radiation treatment was not a big deal. So, and so far I've had no after effects, except you can tell that I lost all my hair, because normally you see me with a full head of blonde locks, right? So, anyways, no, for anybody who's facing that, I wish them luck. Feel free to reach out to me if you or anybody in your family member is dealing with that. Not that I'm an expert, but I have had it for 5 years now, stage 4. So I know about some things, and now I know about radiation. And it was, you feel it actually was a good feeling, because you feel like you're fighting. You feel like you're doing something. The worst part of cancer is if you're stuck sitting there feeling like there's nothing you can do. Fortunately, I have not been in that position. I've always had some treatment available. And also to those of you guys that are out there that work in the medical profession, I don't know if there's any doctors listening to the channel, but a lot of nurses, your work is very much appreciated, and the compassion you show is also, it's been not only for myself, but for other family members. What I've seen over the last several years, we're just all very, very appreciative. So we can talk more. So since we're still talking about Kohlberger, I don't have their names at the top of my head, but the brunette girl and her boyfriend that were on the second floor, and the roommate that survived on the second floor. And one of the things that she heard from her room was somebody kind of saying something soothing, like, I don't remember, I don't have it in front of me, but something to the effect of, don't worry, I'll take care of it, or it'll be okay, or something like that, or whatever. To me, when I hear this, it's terrible to think, because I think he's about to finish her off. And because what the serial killer, what gets him off is that godlike feeling that you have over the victim. And I think that was a rare case. We don't know what they say in their killing process, because usually they kill and the survivor does not become a witness. But I think that's probably not uncommon for them to say something like that, because it's that godlike power that they're after. It's a chemical thing that they need. That's developed. That's what their fantasies have developed around. And I believe that it starts out, any kind of abnormality in the human brain, in behavior, starts out in something that is normal, but that becomes abnormal because of it's unchecked, or it becomes out of whack. So it's normal for human beings to feel a rush, a chemical rush, when it comes to triumph. So, for instance, if you beat someone in a sport, if you beat someone in a fight, it's normal to get that rush. But when you have we don't develop, that doesn't continue to develop in a way that we enjoy cruelty to other people. And the way it develops in that case is because if you have a psychopathic brain, they don't have, their brains are incapable of emotional empathy. They're incapable of it. So as you're developing these normal, as your brain is developing through, particularly through adolescence, but up to that, and these normal things are parts of the brain and parts of the mind are growing. There's no checks and balances there because there is no, I mean, there are checks and balances in some ways, but there aren't the checks and balances that come. One of the main ones would come from the empathy that we develop. And that empathy is what prevents us from developing joy at cruelty to others. Now we can, in that case there, because there's nothing to break it, the fantasy just continues to grow and grow and grow, and it's built around cruelty to others. But, you see a lot of this even with normal people. Now, we'll transition here back to the Karen case just a little bit, the Karen Reed case. What went on this summer with, and continues to go on now, with the joy that people feel at torturing the victims is unacceptable. It's not that these people that are feeling this joy are going to become serial killers. They're not. But everything in degree. So there's something abnormal there. So I've seen the video of court the other day of Aidan Kearney going out and getting in the face of Paul O'Keefe. Paul O'Keefe is John's brother, and doing this with John's mother there. There's something wrong. Okay. There is something wrong with a person who is enjoying that kind of cruelty to the victims of a family. Something's not working correctly in his brain. And it's not working correctly with the people that are watching that channel and are enjoying that. There's something not right. Now, other people might have a sense of conscience and say, wow, maybe I need to stop enjoying these calls where you're calling someone horseface or things like that. Maybe, so not everybody has it to that extreme where you enjoy cruelty. The extreme would be on a 1 to 10. At the 10, that becomes a serial killer. Now, maybe people that are enjoying it a little too much on this are become a 6 or a 7 can dial it back and say, yeah, maybe they are capable of emotional empathy if they allow that part of their brain to kind of click on, and they say, wow, maybe I should not be enjoying this. But even if you convince yourself, as Sean did, that Paul O'Keefe was somehow part of the conspiracy to go after a family victim, the victim, the family of the victim, something's wrong, dude. Something is wrong, and that it shouldn't happen, and we shouldn't encourage it, and we shouldn't enable it by watching those channels. The people that do that, it's just wrong. There's a phenomena here where people are being entertained by cruelty to other human beings, and that has to stop. All right. So another thing that people talk about less now, but comes up, is Higgins. This is ATF agent Higgins, who was in the house, and all summer and right up until recent times, we kept hearing Higgins has flipped. How many times did you hear that on Turtle Boy Live? Higgins has flipped. Does anybody still, how many times did Sean say that? Higgins has flipped. He's flipped on the conspirators. He's telling everybody. Is there anybody out there who still believes that? Is there anybody who believes that? So I guess Jeff still maybe takes that seriously. Jeff says Higgins is well hidden. If he's flipped, isn't it logical that evidence would be turned over to both parties now, and they would have got up there and screamed in front of the judge? That's it. The evidence is there. Higgins has flipped. He witnessed a murder in the house, Indictments are coming, and the state has to drop their case. The state would have dropped their case. Let's put it this way. Let's say the state it was given evidence last Friday. They were given all the evidence, right? So let's say they were given evidence that Higgins has flipped and he was in the house and he saw the murder. Okay. You really think the state would keep the charges going? That's foolish. It's foolish. They wouldn't do that. Even if people on the state are guilty of participating in some degree in the conspiracy, right? Because now it's over. At that point, you have an ATF agent who is cooperating with the government who would be saying that he witnessed the murder in the house. If that happened, the state would drop the charges. They would have dropped it Monday. If that happened and they didn't drop the charges Monday, Alan Jackson would, and rightly would, stand up in court and say, this is a charade, Your Honor, and it's time for them to drop the charges. We've seen the evidence now, and we know that the feds just turned over evidence that John was murdered in the house. It's over. Tell the state to drop the charges. None of that happened. The game show host, Alan Jackson, didn't make any statements like that. Yannetti didn't make any statements like that. Okay, so Higgins did not flip. Higgins did not flip. I mean, it's not rational to believe that he did. Okay, and I'm not trying to, please, Jeff, I'm trying to be sensitive. I'm not trying to, but it's not rational. Okay, I sometimes good people have a belief system that is just so powerful that it starts to overcome the other parts of their mind that are normally very intelligent and good people. And you've had a belief that has been so powerful and you've held it so long that it becomes hard to accept that you were duped. Nobody wants to be duped, right? Everybody's been duped and nobody likes it. And so it becomes very difficult to overcome that. But Higgins did not flip. That was not in the report. It would have been in the report. And we would see the evidence of it. And it's just no longer rational or sane to think that Higgins flipped. He didn't flip. It's no longer rational to think that there was some big piece of evidence in that federal report that proves that John was killed inside the house. It's not rational because the state would have had to drop the charges, and they would have dropped the charges. So it just doesn't make sense to believe that. And it may be painful if you believed for months that Higgins flipped. It didn't happen. All right, so let's take this on again. I guess so. All right, so oops, let me try to Kate Tracy. Let me put up Tracy's comment. All right. Tracy says it seems like they're waiting at the U.S. Attorney's Office is making them wait this out. No, it doesn't seem like that. The U.S. Attorney's Office took the extraordinary step of turning over grand jury minutes, the grand jury testimony to both sides last week. My best friend from college is a judge, not a federal judge, and it's not in this state, so he's not familiar with this case. But I was talking to him last week, and he didn't even believe it was possible or legal that the feds would turn over the grand jury minutes, but they did. So they're turning over everything they have, with a few exceptions that they're holding out to protect themselves. So that's what the latest request by the Commonwealth is. They want to know, the Commonwealth is trying to get to the origins of that bogus investigation. They want to know, so they're looking for things potentially like warrants and things like that. Stuff that would speak about the feds' theory to what the crime was. And that would be the only kind of thing that for whatever reason they didn't turn it over. But the idea that the feds are sitting on some bombshell here, why would they? No, they just turned over the most sensitive information that they have, and that's the grand jury testimony. No, the feds aren't coming. They're not coming. And I understand it's easy for people to be duped. Karen has duped a lot of people for a long time. And Turtle Boy is an entertaining guy on his show, so he sounds so convinced, but no. Is there information that could be useful in that in order to create reasonable doubt? Sure, probably. All you have to do is find anything that seems a little suspect in the investigation. And again, I'm not talking about corruption in the investigation. Just, why didn't you do this or something like that? Enough of that. So, for instance, and I'm not saying that this is inside the investigation. If this is part of the federal investigation, I'm sure it's not. But hypothetical, why didn't Trooper Proctor take a picture of Karen's taillight when the car was before it was towed? So in Dighton at her parents' house. I don't find that suspicious. I wish that they had, though. And now, if you find enough of that stuff, you could create reasonable doubt. If you find enough things that you feel are unexplained. So it's possible that a few more things like that may have been exposed by the feds. So is there information in there that will be useful to the defense team? Almost certainly. Even just if all they had was the testimony of the witnesses that also testified in the state's case. So there was a year between that testimony. There's going to be discrepancy. Nobody's memory is perfect. And any discrepancy is something that the defense can exploit. So there's going to be things that a clever defense team can use in there, of course, just like they go out there and scream, there's a gap in the library video. There's no gap. Or there's a non-human hair. There's no non-human hair. That stuff is gone. All right. Well, they're not going to make those specific claims in the trial because that will be easily dispelled by the prosecution. But there will be other things that they can exploit and kind of spin in their way. And so the more information that you could give them, the more interviews and testimony from the various witnesses, the more that stuff that's there that can be used, the more doubt you can cast on the investigation. That they might find something there that might be useful to convince a juror or two to say there's reasonable doubt. So it's possible, but there's no conspiracy was uncovered by the feds. It just wasn't. And it's not even, again, I want to be forgiving to people that follow the case loosely, that are just following it in social media. Yes, I can understand why you may not have the full understanding that nothing was found. I mean, there's been no indictments. No troopers, no investigators were indicted, arrested, put on leave. Nothing. And they would have been. Those indictments would have happened. Presumably the grand jury, every legal expert that I've talked to has said the grand jury is probably over, and that's why they were able to put that stuff in the TUI process. People couldn't say for sure just because the whole thing is so unusual, but that's how normally it would be, that it was basically over. And when it's over, there's either a vote or they don't ask the jury to end the vote. They just end with the deliberation. They just stop presenting the evidence and it's closed. But if there was a vote for indictments, that becomes actionable immediately. And within hours, certainly within 24 hours, anybody that was indicted by that grand jury would have been arrested. Nobody's been arrested. So there were no indictments. The troopers are still at work. They're still doing murder investigations. So it just isn't reasonable to believe in this stuff, but it's easy to get duped because there aren't a lot of channels that are out there that are telling you the truth. I mean, I listened to Sean a little bit on Mike Crawford, the Young Jerks, the other day. And Mike Crawford, who's been covering this case for months, actually told the audience that he didn't know what exculpatory meant. And so he had to look it up that afternoon. I don't understand it. That's like saying you don't know what the word evidence means. I'm not faulting someone for not knowing what that word means, but it comes up all of the time in a true crime case or in a murder investigation. How could you be covering that case and not knowing what it is? It's like covering true crime and not knowing what a warrant is. You know what it is, right? I mean, if you don't, so he should have looked that up a long time ago. The only reason, but he obviously he didn't care. He's never read a document. He's never come across anything. So he's just doing a show, and it's just for entertainment. And it was easy to just ride that turtle wave. And I don't really see any evidence that any of these guys, Turtle Boy, the Glairer, that little dude in Wales, Dylan, or Mike Crawford, have ever done an ounce of effort into this case. They haven't read documents. They haven't asked questions. They weren't interested in the truth, and they aren't interested in the truth. Let's not even pretend that they are. Okay, they're interested in entertaining people that want to believe in a conspiracy. But it's okay to listen to that, because that's entertainment is part of what YouTube is about. But you have to have some common sense and say, all right, are these guys serious? Are they asking real questions? Are they doing real analysis? Are they looking at evidence? And the answer is no, because anybody that's even remotely serious understands that at this point, it's no longer reasonable to think that, for instance, John was attacked by a dog. It's not. The DNA, the clothing was tested by independent labs that both sides agreed on, and they found no canine evidence. That's it. Dunsky. All right. There was no dog attack, and it's no longer reasonable to believe in it. Okay. The GPS is very solid that John never went in the house. Dunsky. All right. Now, is there still reasonable doubt? Maybe you find something wrong with the investigation, or it wasn't proven exactly what happened outside of the house. Maybe someone else hit John. I mean, all those things you can speculate on. But the main parts of this conspiracy, gone. The idea that Colin Albert was there, gone. It's not part of the case. And anybody that seriously is saying that isn't even a good person. They're not even a good person to do this shit. All right. GPS is pretty accurate. So yeah. And then there's the feds. Like as I've been saying, there's just no reason that any serious person that is interested in the truth and is asking these questions would actually take an interest, would actually still make the claim that the feds are coming. Some of the people that do this stuff, maybe they do it because they're getting paid. Let's just call it what it is. I know for a fact that Karen was paying for PR up until Natalie got involved and came aboard to help her. She was paying $15,000 a month. I don't know that she still is, but you look at the behavior of some of the people in social media, and it's kind of clear that they must be getting paid. I'm not going to say the names, you know where they are, but at some point, some of the things that people are saying, I'm not talking about just regular normal questions about whether the investigation was good or whatever, but some of the wilder claims that are out there, these people just either aren't interested in the truth, they aren't too smart, or they're working as part of the PR team for Karen. And that's going to come out eventually. You're not going to be able to keep, listen, they have her phones, and eventually, now we don't know if she did wipe them, but there's going to be a lot of stuff that I would think that most of the things involved in this case are eventually going to come out, just like we eventually found out how close she was working with Aiden and how close Aiden was working with both attorneys. So the people that she's using as PR, yeah, I think that's eventually going to come out. So people better that are doing this, that are performing this, especially if they're actually going as far as going on shows and putting their face on the screen, they better keep that in mind. The truth will come out. All right, we'll look just for a few more questions, and then I have to go have supper. Caitlin is always one of our good panel members in chat, so let's see what she's saying. If she didn't do anything, she'd know she'd be getting exonerated, and truth would come out in the end. Why taunt them? Disgusting. I mean, I will say Karen looked extremely confident in court yesterday, smug even. So, but what is that based on? Again, there's not going to be any smoking gun evidence. They would have already been shouting that from the rooftops. So I think she feels confident because she knows it does seem like maybe there was a personal connection from her or one of the attorneys to the feds. So maybe she thinks that's still going to help save her. But I mean, she confident that there'll be that a turtle rider will get onto a jury. I don't know. You can get a false sense of confidence when you're stuck in the weeds of a case like this. So I think, we'll see what that is. But I mean, just the evidence is the evidence here. And there might be hope for reasonable doubt because of flaws in the investigation. But one thing that we know is that John was not killed inside that house. And that's just a fact. All right, let me go back to a few questions. Tom said 15 grand per month. How rich are the Reeds? They have a lot of resources. And you would do that for your daughter if you had those resources. Top G says he's 90% not guilty. Tracy says, did you listen to the judge yesterday? The attorney's office wrote to the judge, and she said, at this time, they can talk, but not everything's something like that. Well, there's more coming out, yeah, but there's not going to be some big smoking gun thing. Absolutely not. The judge said, at the same time that she talked about that message, she said that she is unaware. She has not been given the documents yet. So she's going to hear them in court or to whatever presented to her by motions. But she was not sent a copy of the documents, as is apparently how that's done legally. But she understands this is an extremely unusual investigation. And I took it to, she was basically saying, hey, I got a letter saying you got permission to talk about this in court. So, we can talk about it at length and get into the weeds on March 12th. And she eventually said that that they're going to have scheduled for 9 and they can have all day. But I took it that she was giving them the chance. Hey, if there's a big smoking gun and you want to get it out, say it right now. Now's your chance. No, if there was some smoking gun, for instance, if Higgins had flipped and confessed that John was killed in the house and blah, 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 nobody would fault Alan Jackson and Yannetti. Actually, nobody would have faulted them if they got those documents last, whatever it was, Thursday or Friday. Nobody would fault it. I think they got them Thursday. If an hour later they stood before the mics and said, that's it, this is over, and it's time for the state to drop the case. You may say that that wouldn't happen because there's a process that has to go through. But if there's a big smoking gun thing like that, they would skip that process and nobody would fault them for it. The judge would not fault them for it because nobody wants to see an innocent person go to jail for murder. Obviously, the conspirators, if there were any, would want to see that. But Judge Canone is not part of the conspiracy. And nobody would have criticized them for doing that. And then they had another opportunity there in court to do it. And she seemed to be kind of inviting them. And they didn't make any such statements like that. They said the usual, all this stuff was exculpatory, but of course they're going to say that. So, Patrice said, I will never understand how the FBI doesn't review the digital evidence and evidence that the state had on her before they continued working with her team. She wasn't terrified that they would call her out fast. I'm not sure about the last sentence, what it means, but we know from the DA in their opposition motion that the feds never requested a single piece of evidence from the state. So feds were not investigating the murder, which is a little bit odd because if you're investigating the investigators, part of that would have to be to determine what the state's theory is on the murder and whether it's accurate. So it's really unusual. I think, and I could tell from the way the state made a point of putting that into their opposition, that they found it strange too. Like if you're really going to investigate a murder, whether or not that investigation was corrupt, common sense is that investigation would include investigating the evidence of the murder, but they didn't do any of that. Now, did they have any data that they could look at? Well, they would have got, my understanding is they did get data. But again, I don't think that they ever presented anything to a judge that said, we have reason to believe this murder investigation was corrupt or whatever. So they didn't, I have no idea what's in the warrants, but I'm just speculating based on what we can see. That, so for instance, I don't think that they probably got, for instance, Jen McCabe's phone data, which is, Rich Green famously from the defense says that she made a search at 227 for how long to die in the cold. I don't think they looked at that. I don't think that they looked at John's phone data that supposedly showed him walking up and down the stairs. I could be wrong, but I don't think that they looked at that. I think that they just were told that the investigation was corrupt, and they looked at the investigators. So they looked at their messages, for example. But if that's the case, they had to explain to a judge why they were justified, why they had probable cause in getting those messages. And we need to see that. And I think the DA is now demanding that we see that. Now, you get into this funny stuff with the feds. You saw where they just ignored the letters for almost a year from the DA. Do they turn around now and say, well, we're not going to give it to you. Nothing you can do. We're the feds. Maybe. And maybe they ignore it. But it gets really hard to do when they've given everything else over, because, again, most normal people in the public and professionals looking at it and saying, okay, what are they hiding? So does the IG, this is the Inspector General that every federal agency has. These are supposed to be independent, and they look at to make sure there's they look into wrongdoing by federal agencies. And I, from my limited experience reading these documents, these IGs, I think they take their job seriously, kind of like internal affairs for the police, right? And I think that so we look at, for instance, the Inspector General Horowitz, who was appointed by Barack Obama and who was assigned to look into the origins of the FBI investigation into Trump. And I think he did a fair job. He did a good job, and from his point of view, an honest job trying to get to the bottom of that. I don't think he in any way tried to obstruct or bury the now, we've seen a lot of obstructive action over the last 6 years by the FBI in Washington to try to cover that up. A lot. I'm not even going to go into it. But I think the IG in that case did a good job. And the other IG things that I've looked at, since, for instance, the one that investigated Rachel Rollins, they seem to take their job seriously. So if an IG looks into Josh Levy, there's at least a good chance that they're going to force him to reveal what predicated this investigation and what communications he had with the defense. I don't know what the law is on that. We know those communications were improper. Were they illegal? I don't know. So it should be interesting. All of a sudden, Josh Levy, who we never used to see in the media, over the last 3 weeks, he's in the media every 4 days with some big bust or something like that. Nothing to do with the Karen Read case. It feels a lot like damage control. He's a ghost. You never see him. And then all of a sudden, this whole thing is busting open. And it looks like he was either duped or was corrupt. We don't know. And but suddenly he's in the press every day. It's really weird. Got behind on the questions again, so I'll skip to the end. Judy says Higgins was smart enough to get out of Dodge and away from the train wreck Karen. I mean, so we know from the state that a couple of weeks before John was killed, that's when Karen walked. This is according to Higgins' testimony. So again, the idea that Higgins flipped, but we are getting snippets of his testimony came out in the state's opposition. So again, one more proof that just didn't happen. But he says that Karen walked him out. So he had come over to John's house for the Patriots game when they got slaughtered by Buffalo a couple years ago. And Karen said, "I'll walk you out." And she kissed him on the lips and tried to begin a relationship there. And we also know that it seems that that she went by his house, according to him. This is, I don't know, days later or something, or a week later or whatever. According to him, she contacted him, "Can I come by?" And he says no, but that she did go by anyways. So, I mean, Higgins was just kind of being a dog, but that doesn't mean he's corrupt. And once he found out what happened, that John had died, he immediately went to the police and turned in his messages. So we have those messages. We don't have them, but the both parties have those messages We've got a little bit of information about that now, but we had a lot. We'll get a lot more during the trial. Qbert says, Caitlin, I've heard it all. And how about how I be the mature one and say, let's agree to disagree? Well, that's good. I like maturity. Sometimes I'm capable of being mature too. Sometimes. It's not a smear job on Josh Levy. It's based on what we're looking at. It's based on what's in documents now. It's based on the opposition. There's a lot of evidence here. I'm not just pulling stuff out of a hat. This is not like the woman who called up Mike Crawford's show yesterday and said Brian Albert took over for Whitey Bulger. There's no evidence of a crime, of any crime involvement by Brian, or even hanging around with criminals, or even wealth that would have to be explained for. None of that's there, but yet people just, oh, yes, okay. That's the thousands of people that listen to that channel. And Sean seemed to be entertaining it too. I'm sure Sean knows that's not true, but in his mind, Brian Albert is some kind of warlord, crime lord. It's crazy. So, but I'm basing what I'm saying about Josh Levy is based on having looked at a lot of evidence going back to first 2022. I've seen Karen's messages to Natalie, and she's saying that Josh Levy was directly involved and going to make an exception and become the prosecutor in this case and question the witnesses, and he did. We've also seen evidence that information was even about federal grand jury scheduled testimony was improperly turned over to the defense team. And then, as I said, most recently, he had according to what Karen told Aidan Kearney, there was a conference call between Josh Levy and Alan Jackson and Yannetti. This is extremely improper. You could maybe argue that it was improper but understandable if it turned out there was a vast conspiracy, but there is no vast conspiracy. Nothing was uncovered along those lines. Nothing, literally zero. So, no, I'm not slandering him. Not slandering him at all. He's going to have to answer to this stuff. And I'm speculating based on what I know that something improper happened here. I'm speculating based on solid evidence. Woo Sox says, Kevin, assuming that Levy actually told the defense team to stall the trial, what would be the purpose? So I think what you're probably suggesting is that the purpose is that they might be about to uncover the grand conspiracy, just buy us a little more time. No, it seems more to me, now that we know that they've turned in what they had, that what the purpose was, hey, we're helping you. Whatever little things we can find, you can use. So try to delay so we can talk to the troopers and maybe find some little thing that can be exploited. The more you delay, the more it helps the defense. But in every way, it seems like Josh Levy was acting like an ally of the defense team. That's it's not just improper, it's wrong. And now that we see that evidence of that, we have to start holding their feet to the fire. Have I seen documents? I'm not sure which documents you mean. I haven't seen anything that I shouldn't see. So Judy's talking about a possible connection between Karen's father, who was the dean at Bentley College, and supposedly, and I don't know this, I haven't researched it, Bentley College used Ropes and Gray, the elite, powerful law firm where Josh Levy was a partner. But I don't actually know that. So I don't want to report it because I don't know it, but I'll talk about that. That's what a theory that's out there. I don't know if it's been backed up. You guys can tell me. Maybe Judy can tell me if it's been documented in any way. I really, I just don't know. So, all right, guys, I'm going to give it like just 20 more seconds to see if a question comes in, because I always feel bad ducking a question, and then I am going to go have supper. So, guys, do you have any more questions regarding the Karen case? Please, again, visit Mindstalker from Death Row to see more about more of my interviews with Bill Noguera. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there if you're interested in true crime. So, Top G, are you saying that the feds are in bed with the defense? Yes, that's what the evidence seems to be. And that evidence was put in the opposition that was recently filed by the DA. They made that clear. So it's going to be up to the feds to prove that wasn't the case. But there's also a lot of other smoke here to indicate a fire going back to the summer of 2022. So whether that is a matter of Josh Levy being duped, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that he was duped. But if that's the case, he needs to come clean and say, I was duped by this defense team. I had some connection to Yannetti, so I let him in my office and he convinced me, blah, blah, blah. Okay. That's a human thing. It's a mistake, but you got to come clean. You got to come clean because the feds have now interfered with a murder investigation, and that could impact justice. That could impact whether justice is done here. So that's a big deal. That's a big deal. And he needs to come clean, but obviously he wants to do it in a legal way, but he needs to actually come clean. And we don't know that he is or he isn't, but it's very important. I don't know what the alpha nurse is. Is Turtle Boy on at 9? Am I watching? No, I'm not watching that. I stopped watching in May because the show was too long. I didn't start watching until April. So I only watched it for a few weeks. But at some point, I started to realize that you're supporting cruel behavior, truly cruel behavior. And I did not want to take entertainment in that. And plus just mindless behavior, this idea that nobody can ask questions. Nobody's allowed to ask questions with Turtle Boy. So, I mean, what kind of people he expects people to call him daddy? That's a cult, dude. That is a cult. And anybody that would call him daddy, you're going to fault me for talking about a mindless mob when here you have a guy that's the leader of these people that wants them to call him daddy and they call him daddy. Yeah, that's the mindless mob. I'm not saying the mindless mob is everybody that had questions about the case. Of course not. And I've said that on every show when it comes up. But there is a mindless mob. I mean, they're pretty much zombies. And anybody that's calling another man who isn't their father daddy is a zombie. Hillbilly Nitro, good to see you. Thank you. Paisley, you're getting here late, so we're just signing off, but thank you for joining us. We'll be back again soon. And Caitlin, not allowed to have any sort of opposing opinion. And I think that's where Caitlin was throughout this process too. Maybe starting out leaning strongly towards conspiracy, but asking questions, and you keep asking questions. And she found out from her experience that you were not allowed to ask questions on that group or with those people. So if that's the side you want to be on, okay. All right, guys, have a good night. I'm going to have dinner. Thank you.